Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca Gironi from Climate Kick. This is the last of our series of 6 trainings that we have conducted in the last month. We will talk about adaptation and resilience together with our Climate Kick colleague, Leah Alvarez. Before we start, I wanted to announce that on the 23rd of April, we will host a workshop in which people will have the opportunity to network, amplify knowledge exchange, and reflect together on potential solutions about circular bioeconomy. If you are registered to one of the trainings that we have conducted so far, you should have received an email with an invitation. But if not, I will share an invitation link in the chat of this Zoom call, so you can check if you are interested and you can register to that event. So that was it for the announcement, and now I leave the floor to Leah. Go ahead.
Thank you a lot, Rebecca. Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Alvarez. I work in Climate Geek for already, let's say, 5 years on the topic of adaptation and resilience. What we do mostly is work with the startups and in some cases, specific governments about what is adaptation and resilience, how they can build it up, how they can understand is related to adaptation and resilience we can talk about. So today, as part of this session, we are going to talk about adaptation and resilience business models and how you can use the Climate Causality Framework to present how your innovation is related to adaptation and resilience and how you can find these indicators to improve your narrative. So let's start now. I don't know why. Some little rules about, do you see this as well? When just, I don't know why this.
Yeah, now we see the presentation mode with the sessions rules.
Yeah, I don't know what that happens. Okay, thank you. Please let me know if you again see that screen because I am looking at the other monitor.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so some sessions rules is please keep your camera on because this gives me a good idea if what I'm saying makes sense or if I should slow down or go faster, whatever. Please keep your microphone on mute, otherwise people might get distracted. And also raise your hands in case that you have a comment, question, or whatever you want to share with the rest of the group. I will say we are quite a small. Why this happens? I don't understand. We are a small group, so I would recommend that instead of raising your hand, just unmute yourself and just say what is your comment, question, or whatever. Also, it's a bit difficult for me to track the chat at the same time that I'm looking at you and I'm looking at the presentation. So I would prefer if you just unmute yourself and say your question directly. This is really annoying. Give me 1 second.
Do you want to try to reshare?
Yes, I'm going to do that. Let's see if. Okay, I'm going to share. Okay, I hope that now works well. Otherwise, I will try something else.
Okay.
Okay. So the agenda of today's session is going to be first, we're going to have a small introduction about what is climate change and why adaptation and resilience is important. Then what are the main elements of adaptation and resilience, which are risk, resilience, and adaptation. Then the climate causality framework, which is the way how we communicate it. Different business models inside of adaptation and resilience, examples of these business models, and key learnings. So any questions until this point before we start? No? Okay. So let's start with a quick introduction. So I am sure that everybody in this call already know that climate change is happening and every year the temperatures are increasing and they are setting new records in comparison to the previous years. This is relevant because that also means that the climate hazards are worsening. So we see heat extremes, droughts, wildfires, storms, floods, and sea level rise that we haven't seen so often in comparison of how we have seen it in the past years. So normally a flood or a storm that we could see in a region every 10 years, now we see it every 2 years. So it's becoming quite frequent. By having these climate hazards, there is also some impacts that are becoming more intense, such as some of them are water supply disruption, agricultural production decrease, ecosystem, supply chain, disaster risk, health, and infrastructure. Maybe some of you think, okay, I understand that this is happening. I understand that climate change is happening and there is more climate hazards. But to be honest, I don't see how this relates to my business or to my activities specifically. I know this is important, but I don't know what to do about it. Well, the reality is that when we have intensifying hazards, we have primary impacts and we have secondary impacts. When we talk about primary impacts, we mean things that happen right away, just after the hazard happened. And when we talk about secondary impacts, we are talking about impacts that we will see for the next 5, 10 years, and they will just keep advancing even if the climate hazards stop happening. So an example of this is that if we experience a rainfall variability, this can in combination with heat extremes, this can create droughts, which can also create wildfires. If we have one of these combinations of hazards, then we have primary impacts, which are water stress and increase in demand. There is heat stress. There is also a decrease in agricultural yields. There is an increase in pests and diseases, which can create secondary impacts that are increased costs, an decrease in income and livelihood, supply chain disruption, food prices increase, there is more food insecurity, there is increased poverty, worsening health, migration, and in general insecurity in different forms. So the first thing that I would like to ask you is, can you tell me of a hazard you are already experiencing in your context and how this hazard is affecting you and how it's affecting your business or local businesses? No volunteers?
We have an answer in the chat, which is weather systems.
Weather systems?
And fires.
Yes, but I want to know, like, these fires happening in your region, how are they affecting activities? Yes. So due to these fires and water system, agriculture is under extra stress. Yes, and probably the yields are decreasing, which also means a really high economic loss for the farmers. The increase to maintain uh, the crops is also increases, and also the more waste is created. So this also not only affects the farmer, but also affects the people living in the region that probably are eating from what these farmers are cultivating. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so here we have an example. If we have something like increased rainfall variability, this can create impacts such as shifts and unpredictable, unproductive, ow, I'm having issues saying that word. Unpredictability in the start and end of rainy seasons. So there is also an increased risk of dry periods within growing seasons and seed and crop losses. Also, if we have hazards such as higher temperatures and lower rainfalls, this can create things such as increased evapotranspiration, reduced soil moisture, and reduced productivity. If we have hazards such as more intense rainfall, this can damage the crops. There is soil erosion, flooding, infrastructure, and damage in general. And as mentioned in the chat, all of this is also affects the biodiversity, and which can affect also the crops in the long term. So there is some terminology that we need to know when we talk about adaptation and resilience. So now we are going to talk about the difference between risk, resilience, and adaptation, and understanding key terms and concepts and relevance in terms of businesses. So we have this diagram from the IPCC where we can see that we have the risks in the middle, and then we have different variabilities. We have hazard, vulnerability, exposure, and response. And based on this diagram, we can see that the more the hazard increases, the more the response needs to increase, and also if the hazard increases, the vulnerability and exposure also increases. So what is a hazard? A hazard is potentially harmful manifestations of climate change. Then vulnerability is the susceptibility of population system to harm when exposed to a hazard. Exposure is the number of people, amount, value of assets in an area affected by a hazard. And lastly, we have response, which are the actions taken to address hazards that might reduce or inadvertently increase risk. Response themselves can be create risks. So once you read this, you might think like, okay, but what can I do about each one of these categories? Well, to reduce hazards, we need to do things such as reducing emissions or mitigation, because by reducing the amount of CO2 emissions that we are creating, this also means that we are giving a little bit less fuel to the climate hazards to become stronger every year. So this is like thinking for the future, for the climate hazards to not become that strong. Then we can create better response, so we can ensure short-term responses provide foundation for effective, sustainable, and equitable adaptation in long term. So we need to have protocols or things that people can follow to be able to cope with these climate hazards. We can reduce vulnerability by improving ability of people, organizations, systems to cope with and adapt to climate change impacts. So when we talk about vulnerability specifically, we're talking about the people living in there and how they're affected. So it can be things that might be individual, such as how specific groups are affected by heat waves and other groups are affected by low temperatures. Then when we talk about reduced exposure is how the city or the infrastructure is being exposed to these new climate hazards and how we can reduce that that exposure or that vulnerability of this settlement. So obviously in here is easier to be said than done, but an example is relocate settlements, people, infrastructure, economic activities away from high risk areas, so we can decrease the vulnerability of the people that are located in these areas. So by this point, I have said multiple times these three words, which are mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. And maybe it's a bit unclear for you what is the actual difference between all of them. Well, when we talk about mitigation, we are talking about avoiding and reducing emissions, so we can address the root cause of these climate hazards so they do not happen that often or that strong in the long term. When we talk about resilience is about how people can cope with the climate hazards that are already happening now, how they can decrease their vulnerability to these climate hazards. And when we talk about adaptation, it's about adjusting to these new climate hazards that might happen along the way. If you remember from a previous slide, we have this example that if you combine droughts with rainfall variability, you can create wildfires. So this is a new climate hazard. Maybe it was not that common like a few years ago, but now it's becoming more common, and therefore we need to take it into consideration. So in this slide, there is an example that I like to give, is that imagine that you want to go outside. You look at the sky and you see that the it's a bit cloudy, and therefore it might rain because you are in the rainy season. So yes, you decide to take like your rain jacket with you. If you do that, that's resilience, because you can see already a pattern. You see that this is going to happen. But if you want to go outside and then you see that the sky is completely blue, but the weather has been a little bit weird, so you just put a jacket just in case, this is adaptation, because everything is telling you that this might not happen, but taking in consideration the information that you have, you decide to take measurements against it. And in the case that you buy a rain jacket that is from made in a sustainable way instead of being from fast fashion, that's mitigation. Do you have any question about these concepts? No? Okay. So something really important when we talk about mitigation, adaptation and resilience that normally is not spoken that often is that we need to take care of maladaptation. So, what is maladaptation? Maladaptation is basically when you try to do something good and you end up doing something wrong. So, basically, you try to solve an issue without looking to the medium or long term effects of the solution, and you end creating a long term problem. So, for example, we have here a maladaptation example that is that you have an irrigation to address increased water scarcity that is not sustainable and depletes groundwater reserves to the point where agricultural systems collapse. Another example is a few years ago there was this study made from, I don't remember the name of the city, but it was a city from India where basically they saw that each year the temperature of the city was increasing a lot, specifically in one neighborhood. And they were looking at that and they realized that there was a pattern between the increase of the temperature with the number of AC units bought. So basically, when you buy an AC unit, what you do is you cool down this space and you pump the heat outside into the street. But if you combine that with a place that is quite dense and has a lot of units in the same place, then basically the streets become unlivable because all of the heat is being pumped into the streets and then the temperature is increasing. And also, this heat gets into the houses, then the houses need more electricity to cool down, so it creates this feedback loop that basically gets worse every year because more people will need the AC units. So this is an example of maladaptation. So I'm curious about your experience. Have you seen maybe I don't know, like a campaign or maybe some refurbishment or things that maybe your local government has done in your city that later on ended up having a negative effect in the medium or long term? Or maybe just another example of maladaptation that you have lived through. No? Okay. So here is a second exercise based on the same hazards and same impacts that we have discussed before. So imagine that you have a hazard such as increased rainfall variability, and then the impact is shift and unpredictability in the start and end of rainy seasons. So there is an increased risk of dry periods within growing seasons. Then the adaptation resilience approach is that resilience of existing agricultural systems through forecast, insurance, water storage, and short season crops. So, for example, in this one, in theory, it sounds perfectly fine. We don't see a maladaptation risk. However, due to experience and the companies that we have worked with, we see a few of them. For example, forecast. Agriculture, yeah, like some farmers can become quite dependent on the forecast, and they can trust a lot on how the forecast is showing that the weather variability for the following months, and they plan their crops based on that. However, if the forecast is not well calibrated, or there has any issue, this can compromise the whole crop of the farmer, because they are putting a lot of trust on these forecasts. Another one is insurance. We have also seen that maybe small farmers trying to have like an insurance in case that they lose their crops. However, there is some insurance that might pay in a month, and there are other insurance that they might pay the farmers in a year or year and a half. This creates a lot of difference for a farmer, specifically when they need the money to be able to just continue their activities and create another source of income. So these are maladaptation risks when the innovation is done in a positive way but can create some negative effects. It's important to mention that all companies, all innovations have maladaptation risk. Is more about understanding they exist and understanding what you can do to cope with them and decrease this risk, and also protect your user or your customer. So in the moment that this risk happen, they have a backup plan. Any questions about this? No? Okay. If not, if you have a question along the way, just jump in and say it. Okay. So now we have talked a little bit about adaptation resilience, about the hazards, the impacts, and the adaptation and resilience. And maybe you already see that there is a connection between the different areas, and basically here there is already a story to be told. So taking this as the foundation, we are now going to talk about the Climate Causality Framework and how we can talk from impacts to opportunities. So, why adaptation resilience is a good opportunity for businesses? Well, intensifying climate change hazards and impacts pose severe risk to ecosystem, livelihood, food production, water security, infrastructure, health, and economy. This risk needs to be addressed through resilience and adaptation. This means opportunities for the private sector to drive adaptation innovation, often with support from donors and multilateral climate funds that recognize limits of conventional projects. Taking these opportunities requires understanding of what is needed to address impacts. Because also when we talk about adaptation resilience, we do not talk only about business to business or business to customer. We are also talking about how this yeah, I see a hand raised, how this company can also have some indicators that might be relevant for governments and for multilateral organizations. Yes, Chana?
Yes, hi Leah, thanks. I had a question about the previous slide. I'm just wondering, isn't it with maladaptation that it's only really visible in hindsight that you then see the negative consequences long term? So how can you take those into account when you're actually planning and make sure that there aren't adverse side effects?
So basically, it's understanding your concept and understanding how your innovation interacts with the economy and the society and environment and so on. And once you understand your interaction and the dependence of these people from your assets, service, or whatever, you can see also what are some areas where the people become vulnerable. Maybe this sounds too complicated, but for example, if you do a product and this product needs to pass through a factory, then you already know that the people working in the factory are vulnerable to the processes. You already know that your products might leak some chemicals, might create some fumes, things like that. So just by being aware of this, taking in consideration the regulations and monitoring your users, you can already decrease the maladaptation risk of your innovation in the long term. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's quite helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Leah, there was also a comment about this slide in the chat, saying that in Ireland they are about to have more specific regional and local weather forecasts. So yeah, regarding what you are saying about the maladaptation risk about forecasts.
Yes, I mean, it is important that everything is quite regional and context-wise because there is a lot of changes from one place to another. But also it's important to have some measurements uh, or some disclaimers. So the users that are using this forecast, they know what are the limitations of these forecasts. So they know that they can take it as a guide of how the weather is going to look like, but at the same time, they should not trust fully on it or have other forecasts as backing up. So they have a better understanding of how their future will look like, to be honest. Yeah, but thank you. Yes, we have seen that the insurance industry is getting more and more active in this field, specifically with this of the weather forecast, uh, because since we have seen a lot of changes in the climate that are becoming too unpredictable, is basically a lot of the innovations, a lot of the farmers, and a lot of other type of innovators. They need this insurance, otherwise they cannot move forward because there is a really high upfront cost, and if they do not have a backup, then it's not possible for them to survive in case that there is a hazard. Thank you for sharing it. Okay, so now we are going to talk about the Climate Causality Framework, from impacts to opportunities. I will present this. And then here is how the climate causality works. So basically, first you understand what are the hazards happening in your location and which ones are getting stronger and stronger every year. Then what are the impacts of these hazards? What is happening due to them? And then what are some solutions that could help decrease the impact of these hazards? So an example of this is that if we have delayed onset or false start of rainy seasons, extreme rainfall, or shift to hotter, drier conditions, then we can see seed loss after planting, crops loss once germinated, destruction of crops, loss of livestock due to flooding, reduced productivity of existing crops, and increased likelihood of crop losses. Then some innovations that can be created to actually decrease this risk are climate information services. So people have short to medium term forecasts to inform agricultural scheduling, what we have just talked in the previous slides. Then we have weather-based insurance, so crops and livestock insurance payment based on either losses or occurrence of specific climate extremes. Then environmental management, so physical climate risk management, soil health management tools to reduce erosion and flood impacts. And we can also have new crops varieties and types. So drought tolerant, short and growing crops varieties and entirely new crops. So for example, from all of these options, this is all of them are quite relevant, but the one that has least maladaptation risk are the ones that are going with new type of crops that have like shorter growing crop varieties and are drought tolerant. So first, to even start doing this, we need to understand if what we are doing, when we are doing our service or product, we're talking about product, service, or climate intelligence. When we talk about products, we are talking about tangible items that a company offers to consumer or physical items that a company can make for someone. When we talk about services, we are talking about intangible items arising from the output of one or more individuals that is consumed at the same time it is produced. So an example of this will be a software as a service, an app, or things like that. Then we have climate intelligence, that is most commonly a subset of services related to data and information that enables the identification, monitoring, and assessment of climate hazards, impacts, risk, and adaptation options. So here we have some examples. We have products. When we talk about products, we are talking about infrastructure, solar pumps, drought-resilient seed and drip irrigation systems. When we talk about services, it's more about water-based insurance, agricultural advice, water monitoring, linking producers with markets, capacity building, and training. And then when products become climate intelligence is when we also create climate bulletins with updates or early warning systems. And it becomes a service when we have SMS forecast, climate advisory service, or early warnings from third parties. So do you have any questions about this? No? Okay. So here we have an example of one company. As a disclaimer, we have never talked to this company. We have done this exercise based only on the information that we were able to find from them from their Facebook and LinkedIn accounts. And based on that information, we were able to understand that in Kenya, there is these major climate hazards, which are increased rainfall variability, higher temperatures and lower rainfall, and more intense rainfall. What are the impacts of these hazards in Kenya specifically? Well, there is a seasonal shift, dry periods in growing season, there is higher evapotranspiration, lower soil moisture, crop damage, soil erosion, flooding, infrastructure, and damage. So what they're doing to decrease these impacts? Well, the Mahi Agri created water infrastructure, including harvesting ponds, irrigation systems, supported with training, agrobusinesses consultancy, and research. They also do promotion of agroforestry to increase forest recovery. So this is how it would look like in a company. And the most important thing is to understand how their innovation is related to climate, because in most of the cases, when we see the innovation of a company, we don't see how it relates to the environment, even if they are environment focused. Okay. So now we are going to talk about adaptation and resilience business models. First, what is an adaptation and resilience business model? Well, it's more than just going green. It's not focused on reducing emissions and not linked to carbon markets, normally, because there is some exceptions. However, they may generate mitigation co-benefits that can help leverage finance. Instead, they focus on addressing hazards, risks, and impacts. Adaptation business models help people and organizations survive and navigate climate change by reducing the risk and costs associated with climate change, hazards, and impacts. So an adaptation business model is a company providing technologies, products, or services that address systematic barriers to adaptation by strengthening users' ability to understand and respond to climate change risk and impacts, and or prevent or reduce physical climate risk or impacts on assets, economic activities, people, or nature. So here are the main indicators that normally we focus on when we're talking about adaptation resilience, which are the number of people, the nature that normally we are talking about hectares, and also the assets or economic activities. So there is different ways of reducing the risk when we talk about this field. We have four capacities that have been developed by the IPCC. So the first one is anticipatory, so basically our forecast for planning and agricultural scheduling. Then we have observative, that is rainer for better flood water accommodation, example. Then we have adaptive, that can be water storage or irrigation system for increased droughts. And there can also be transformative, with an example of new production system for novel climate conditions. So in here, for example, it's important to note that the more you go to the left, the more in the status quo you stay, and the more to the right you go, the more outside of the status quo you stay. So, for example, a company in the field of anticipatory, the idea is that if they do their work correctly, then the user basically can take this information and adapt before the climate hazards happen, so their day to day can stay the same. Then observative, the idea of this type of innovation is that basically you as a user, you don't know this innovation is in place, or you don't know it exists. You just know that a climate hazard is happening and you can just continue your life as usual because the innovation is taking care of the consequences of the climate hazard. Then adaptive is when a climate hazard happens and you have this system or product already in place, so you can take advantage of this climate hazard, maybe by having extra water for your crops or something related. And transformative, we are talking normally transformative, we are talking about governmental initiatives that are looking to change completely the status quo because the current status quo is not working. An example of this is maybe a settlement that is in a floating area. It's quite difficult for the government to protect these people, so what they try to do is to move these houses to another location or try to protect these people. But this is really disruptive for their lives, so that's why we say that it's transformative. And I just come like for you to understand a little bit. So 70% of the companies normally they are in observative. That's also the reason why sometimes it's a bit difficult for investments and things like that, because it is difficult for them to show the benefits or the innovation, because their benefits is that nothing is happening, which is good. But it becomes a bit complicated for the others to grasp the level of impact. Then around 10% are in anticipatory, the other 10% in adaptive, the other 15% in adaptive, and around 5% in transformative. Transformative, again, normally is only for governmental initiatives. Do you have any questions about this? Okay, I see some nodding faces, but no questions. Okay. So when is a business an adaptation and resilience business model? Well, when it reduces the impact and cost of climate hazards and is able to answer all of these questions, which is what climate hazard is it helping customers adapt to? What costs and impacts associated with this hazard is it reducing? How is it reducing these costs and impacts? And if it is enabling adaptation rather than targeting direct adaptation. How is it doing this? In which hazard costs and impacts are more relevant? When we talk about direct adaptation, we are also talking about uh, solving the issue right away without thinking in the medium or long term. So basically, we are talking about a solution that might have a high maladaptation risk in the medium or long term, because it's only taking the current scenario and not the future. Yes, this call is being recorded, so you will have access to this recording as well as the presentation.
Yes, and I share the link to find all the recordings and slides on the platform.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so it is recommended to refer to the Climate Causality Framework as a rationale for the business model. So here we go again to the example that I already shared a few slides ago, that about Mahi Agri, that is water supply and irrigation infrastructure in Kenya. So now we understand that they do social enterprise with goal of transforming grain-fed farming to irrigate agriculture water infrastructure. They blend products, services, spans resilience and adaptation categories. So based on what we know from the previous slide, we know that they are absorbative because irrigation allows farmers to absorb, cope with impacts of drought, longer dry periods in the growing season, and unpredictable rainfall. However, we note risk of maladaptation if irrigation leads to adoption of more water-intensive crops in the area with declining rainwater and water resources, including groundwater. So now I'm going to provide different examples of adaptation and resilience business model so you can see that it can take different shapes. Not all of the adaptation resilience companies look the same. For example, we have this one that is AgroSmart from Brazil. They do data service for agriculture. Their capacity supported are anticipatory and observative. They provide services and climate intelligence. What they do is data platform and apps for agricultural and climate intelligence. They bring together the main data, information, and indicators for your crops. They integrate forecast, custom alerts, sensor telemetry, digital field notebook, irrigation management reports. They do rainfall and vegetation maps, spraying scheduling, and farm level forecast. They target 9 countries in Latin America. In Latin America, 48 million hectares and more than 100,000 farmers. So they have seen that they have multiple climate hazards due to like nine countries in Latin America. That's quite a lot. Multiple climate hazards. The impacts of the hazards, there are multiples, but most importantly, we want to highlight crop losses and increased costs. So what they do is monitoring, forecast, alerts to guide agricultural planning and scheduling planning. We have another example that is Intechems from Sierra Leone. They do integrated geoinformation and environmental management services. Their capacity supported are anticipatory and observative. They provide services. So they do environmental and climate information services, hazard and risk mapping, climate information disaster management, early warning systems, and data collection. The climate hazards that they tackle are multiple as well, and the impacts of hazards are multiple as well. So what they do is multi-hazard profiling to inform disaster preparedness and management. Again, all of the information is just retrieved from their webpage in this case. Lastly, we have one more example that is Tosheka Textiles from Kenya. They are a social enterprise for silk production and garment manufacture. Their capacity supporter are observative, they provide products and services. They contract farming of silk via social enterprise. Tosheka provides material for rearing erimot, whose cocoons provide raw material for silk. Caterpillars feed on native castor plant, which is more resilient to increasingly frequent droughts and pests than cotton and maize. Thus provides the basis for livelihoods that are better adapted to emerging climate conditions. Tosheka market textiles from silk nationally and internationally, while growers enjoy reliable climate resilience income. So the climate hazard located is in increasing aridity and increasing pests. The impact of the hazard is failure of cotton and maize crops, And the adaptation innovation is shift to alternative materials, Tosheka in this case. An income stream based on silk production. So do you have any questions about these examples, or maybe how would you apply these examples to one of the innovations that you know? No? Okay. So the next topic is about adaptation and resilience, customers, and business modeling. Um, there are different types of businesses that you can have, of customers, sorry. The first one is individuals or households, which normally we are talking about affordable product services that are small scale equipment, insurance, seats, SMS, forecast, food products, between others. There is also other bodies, which can be multilateral organizations, NGO, research bodies, or just international projects. You can be selling research, data, engagement, implementation, material, equipment, aggregation, between other things. Then we have one of the most classics, which are business to business or other businesses. Which can mean that you are selling consultancy services, data, materials, equipment, supply chain, markets, access, processing, between other things. And lastly, you can also be selling to governments. If you're selling to governments, you might be selling consultancy, data implementation, public goods, such as early warning system, utilities, infrastructure, between other things. So here I have two more examples. I have Algae Innovation Solutions from Mexico. They do precision monitoring for biodiversity. They provide products for businesses. Their capacity is absorptive and adaptive. What they do is water treatment for reuse. So microalgae for removal of nitrogen and phosphorus from water bodies and industrial wastewater. They do low-cost, circular, no chemical inputs, odorless, produce water for irrigation feedstock, and they do microalgae extraction for food and cosmetics. So the climate hazard they are focusing on is water scarcity. The impact of hazard is water stress, ecological impacts, and threats to supply. So the adaptation innovation they are creating is a greater recycling for reuse of water in buildings. Then we have another example that is called Gentian from UK. They do environmental remediation. They provide services to private sector and governments. Their capacity is adaptive. So they do machine learning and remote sensing to map habitat types using AI algorithms and satellite data to measure and predict biodiversity based on vegetation, assess urban green infrastructure for adaptation, and identify buildings for green roof retrofitting, biodiversity baselines, and tracking land use changes. Provide services for the developers, landowners, municipality, real estate agents, large corporations. They reduce costs, increase transparency, and scalability of assessments, which are done remotely. So the climate hazards they're looking to tackle are range shifts and local stresses such as water stress, food stress, and changes in climate variability. So the impacts of hazards is habitat loss, species decline, and biodiversity loss. The adaptation innovation is targeting and tracking of urban green spaces and biodiversity hotspots preservation. Okay, so once you have all of this information and you have done it for your innovation or innovation that you are interested on, you can also see how it relates to the business model canvas. For example, you can see in light blue the areas where you can have a little bit of input from the information from the exercise we have done previously, the Climate Causality Framework, and how it can enrich one of the different areas. But in the dark blue, you can see the areas where actually it can increase the value quite a lot. So for example, in value proposition, you can add what risk are we addressing and how resilience capacities climate causality framework look like. Then in customer segments, you can add who are you supporting and what are your customers' needs. And then in revenue stream is about what is your business model archetype and with what type of customer you are addressing. Okay. So now we're going to go to the last part, which are business model archetypes. But I feel that you have been quite silent. So I'm just curious if yeah, if there has been any questions or comments or anything. I see in the chat that there is nothing. Okay, so then I will continue to the next section. Okay, so this is business model archetypes. What archetypes are more relevant for adaptation and resilience business? The idea of this section is to show you once more that adaptation and resilience has many shapes and forms, and therefore a lot of companies can enter into this area. So we have 12 archetypes that we can see commonly inside of adaptation and resilience. We have provide on demand, hidden revenue, franchise, aggregators, razor and blade, subscription, marketplace, cooperative, product financing, premium, social enterprise, and public goods. Now I'm going to define quickly each one of them so you are aware of this different business model, and maybe you can see already some similitudes with the innovations you're working with. So first we have the first set of of archetypes. The first one is provide on demand. So basically it's produce products or services continuously or when demand is expressed and extract value from direct sales. So an example of this will be if you go outside and you go for a restaurant and you ask for a dish, then they are going to prepare that dish specifically for you. That's how you normally see provide on demand. In adaptation and resilience, you can see it with equipment, seats, and advisory services. Then we have razor and blades, which is selling the core product at low price and extract value from sales of non-durable parts for use with core products. An example of this, as the name it is called, this is an archetype created by Gillette, where they were selling the razors, and the razor was quite cheap at the moment, and the blades was the expensive part. So the customers needed to come back to buy the blades to be able to use the razor. In adaptation and resilience, we see it a lot with filtering systems or cleaning system that where you need to change pieces after the use of 6 months or X amount of time. Then we have product financing, which are lease or rent a product. Part of lease or rent is a fee, part down payment. That sounds quite complicated, but basically is that it applies the same for normally and also for adaptation and resilience. If you want to buy an equipment or something that has a high upfront cost, then you can do product financing or microfinance building. Then we have hidden revenue, which is main revenue from third party that cross-finances provision of products or services to potential buyers. We see it a lot with social media, where you are scrolling, it's free, but actually you get a lot of ads. And then so they make money by selling these spots of ads to other companies. In adaptation and resilience, you see it a lot with public goods paid by the government, donors, or provided by business. When we talk about this, is for example, we have seen it with Tanzania. Maybe there was like a really a long drought season. So the government, to be able to help the farmers, they buy seeds from another party, and then they give the seeds to the farmers so they have something to plant. So this is public good or hidden revenue because they didn't pay for it and they don't know where they comes from, but they get these goods. So here I have one example. We have Renard from Mexico. This is a nature-based solution for sustainable water management. Their model is provide on demand. They are absorbative. They create products and services, and they provide it to companies and governments. So their adaptation resilience needs addressed. Okay. So what they do is that they found that there is the main climate hazard is warming or higher temperatures and rainfall variability. The impacts of the hazard are water scarcity, flood, and related risks. And what they're doing about it is they do forest reforestation, wetland construction, landscape management, rooftop rainwater harvesting system, and gabions to prevent riverbank erosion. So if we go to the next common archetypes, we have subscription, which is recurring revenue via regular fee for product or service. So if you have any streaming that and climate forecasts or advisories.
Leah, we lost you for like 30 seconds. So if you could repeat the first.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. So the first one is subscription, which is recurring revenue via regular fee or product or service. So an example of this will be streaming platforms such as Netflix, Disney, HBO, or things like that. In adaptation and resilience, we can see it in weather and climate forecasts or advisory services. Then we have freemium, which offer basic products or service at no cost and change a premium for more advanced features. So we see it a lot with actually also with weather and climate forecast platforms where maybe you have the premium version that is not that exact, that is not that constant. So you end up paying, so you see a little bit more detail and it's more reliable. Then we have franchise, which pays fee to use larger businesses, trades, and name and operation system. We see it a lot with small supermarkets and things like that, where basically you see the same store everywhere, but actually it is a franchise, and their owner is a different person. In adaptation and resilience, we see it with resilience products and consultancies that have offices all around the world. Then we have marketplace, which are physical or virtual spaces where buyers meet sellers. And clear example of this will be Amazon, where you scroll down, you select whatever you want to buy, and then you get it shipped. In adaptation and resilience, there is marketplaces that are specialized in adaptation and resilience innovations or environmental related innovations. So here we have an example. This one is water offset from UK. They do grey water recycling. They provide on demand. They are absorbative and adaptive. They provide products and services to households and businesses. They do water neutrality software and hardware. So the climate hazard that they have addressed is water scarcity. The impact of the hazard is water stress, ecological impacts, and threats to supply. So what they do to decrease this impact is by creating greater recycling for reuse of water in buildings. And now we are going to move to the last four archetypes, which actually I think they are the most important because also are not the most common in business as usual in comparison to adaptation and resilience. The first we have is social enterprise, which sell products and or services to serve a useful social purpose. So an example of this is sometimes you have these little stores that sell the marmalade that is made by this person, all the paintings that are made by this other person, and so on. So the idea of these businesses is not to create profit, but to give a space to the people living nearby, so they can create some kind of money that maybe can support them along the way. Then in aggregators, we have people bringing together small producers to increase efficiency and access to the market and services. In aggregators, we see a lot with small farmers that maybe they are being maybe Nestle offers them a contract, but now they need to provide this amount of tons of wheat every X amount of months, and they cannot do that. So what they do is that they partner with other farmers and they get together to be able to produce this amount of wheat so they can tackle this client. Then we have cooperative that are business owned and operated by its members. An example of this will be when you have one family that has two cows, then another family that has chickens, and then another family that has like a different type of crops. So they get together to fulfill their necessities, and what they have extra, they sell it to the community in exchange for maybe other goods. And then we have public goods. There are businesses provide public goods that are paid for by the government or other sources. So we're talking about companies that maybe you have never seen their logo or their name, because normally they sell their product to the government and then the government gives this product to the most vulnerable population. So they're able to feed themselves. So here we have an example. Seed Bombs Tanzania. They do supply chain traceability, they do public good. Their capacity is absorptive and adaptive. They provide products and services to community. So what they do is training students in conservation and reforestation via seed bombs. The climate hazard that they have found is aridification and overuse or bad use of land. Then the impact of the hazard is deforestation and ecological degradation. So what they do about it is they target reforestation, reverse anthropogenic degradation, and enhance climate resilience through the use of their seed bombs. And with that, we have seen the 12 business models, which are quite a lot. Do you have any questions about them? No? Okay. So to close this session, I'm just going to say what we do at Climate Geek and what we recommend for others to do if they want, of course, is that at Climate Geek, what we try to do is when we work with companies in adaptation and resilience, we really try to help them to have indicators, to have a way of proving how they have a positive impact in the medium and long term. So we try to focus on these three areas, which are people, planet, and economy. The first one is how many people are directly and indirectly impacted by your innovation. This is important because this is a number of people that can be benefited by their innovation, but can also be affected in the long term if there is any maladaptation risk. So it also helps the company to have a little bit of accountability and responsibility about the amount of people that are in connection with their innovation. Then we have planet, which how many hectares of natural resource areas are being brought under climate resilient management practices with or due to your innovation. So again, it's about understanding how they're affecting the environment and how they can benefit or affect depending on how they're dealing with the development of their innovation in the medium and long term. And lastly, we have physical assets that their innovation is making more resilient. So basically, if you're using something to make the infrastructure stronger against floods, then you are protecting all of these physical assets. So it's important for these companies to understand how they are making the city better in case of any climate hazard. Okay. So some of the key learnings from this session is that climate change is intensifying climate hazards and impacts. So adaptation resilience is key. Businesses can reduce these impacts and the associated risk and costs by supporting resilience capacities of their customers to anticipate, absorb, adapt, and transform. Adaptation and resilient businesses can use the Climate Causality Framework to identify innovative products and services that enhance these capacities for their customers. Products and services can be delivered using a multitude of business model archetypes. All archetypes are relevant to adaptation and resilience, but some fewer common archetypes are especially relevant. And lastly, businesses need to demonstrate impact and how will they build the resilience capacity. Okay, so with this, we end today's session on adaptation, resilience, and business models. I don't know if you have any questions for me. Otherwise, then I will pass it to Rebecca, where she needs to collect some feedback about the session.
There's a positive feedback that this has been a really informative session.
Thank you, Tiana.
So thank you very much, Leah, for delivering this session. And yeah, now you can, for all the participants, you can scan, just a minute, if you can leave the QR code so participants can scan it, and then you can go to menti.com and insert the code. Let's see how many people joined. Okay. Let me stop the recording.